Video content. Some mothers don't want to die, they just don't want to exist. Introduction. The most misunderstood. There's a time of day that very few people notice. It's when the lights are off. The children are asleep. No more messages arrive. And the mother sits still for a long time, doing nothing, not thinking anything at all. In that moment, a phrase often emerges, very softly, very faintly. I don't want to die. Then immediately after that comes the part that almost no one hears. I just don't want to exist like this anymore. This phrase is often misunderstood. People hear the phrase, don't want to exist, and immediately panic, associating it with extreme conclusions. But for many mothers, that doesn't mean they want to disappear from their children's lives. It simply means they're too tired to continue existing in a state of complete emptiness. They still wake up every morning. They still feed their children, clean the house, answer messages, smile when needed. They haven't given up their responsibilities. It's just that inside, the feeling of being alive has faded, like a sound turned down to the point of being almost inaudible. There are mothers who don't want to die. They just no longer want to exist in the only role they're being held into. No longer want to exist as someone who always has to be okay, always has to be strong, always has to be grateful. This video isn't meant to conclude or diagnose anything. It just begins by re-examining the most misunderstood phrase. Is not wanting to exist a sign of weakness, or the first sign that a person has suffered too long in silence? What does not wanting to exist mean? Not wanting to exist isn't a specific wish. It has no plan, no time frame, no accompanying action. It's a state, a lingering, insidious feeling, difficult to name, and therefore, easily misinterpreted. For many mothers, not wanting to exist is simply the feeling of no longer being present in their own lives. They are physically present, but internally they are like standing behind a thick pane of glass, seeing everything happen, but unable to truly touch anything. They laugh, but don't feel joy. They cry, but don't know why. They are tired, but can't truly rest. It's not sadness, neither is it despair. It's more like a prolonged gray area, where emotions are flattened, day after day passing without leaving a clear trace. Many mothers describe this state. This state is expressed in very gentle sentences. I feel like a shadow. I do everything out of habit. I no longer know what I like or want. But behind that gentleness lies something very serious: detachment from oneself. When a person no longer feels alive, they don't think about ending their life. What they long for is to escape the feeling of having to continue existing in a depleted version of themselves. They don't want to disappear forever. They just want to temporarily pause the feeling of having to exist in pain, responsibility, and silence. Motherhood often pushes this state further. Because motherhood doesn't allow for shutting down. You can't say, today I don't exist. You can't resign from your role. You can't disappear, not even in thought, because there's always a life that needs you immediately. And the mother learns to detach herself from her emotions to continue functioning. Initially, it's a survival mechanism. The body and mind choose to numb themselves to avoid complete collapse. But when this state lasts too long, numbness becomes daily life. No more joy, but not enough to be sad either. No more hope, but not enough to allow despair. Everything is just enough to survive, but not enough to live. What makes not wanting to exist dangerous isn't that it's an extreme thought, but that it's so silent. No one around notices, and even the mother doesn't know what to call it. They think, maybe I'm weak. Maybe I don't appreciate things enough. Maybe I'm not good enough. This self-reproach makes them withdraw even more, become even more silent. And when it's not properly named, this state easily becomes prolonged, repetitive, and deeply ingrained in how a person perceives themselves. Most importantly, it's crucial to understand, not wanting to exist is not a desire to end life. It's a signal that a person has been overwhelmed for a long time without an outlet, without a place to be seen as an independent individual with a role to play. And this signal, if recognized early, always carries the potential for change. Not through grand advice, not through thinking more positively, but by stopping long enough to acknowledge, I'm not okay, and this feeling is real. That alone, the state of not wanting to exist, has begun to move away from its most dangerous zone, the zone of absolute silence. When motherhood becomes a continuous state, motherhood is more than just a role. For many women, it gradually becomes a continuous, unending state. Before motherhood, one can get tired and rest. One can be sad and withdraw. One can remain silent without explanation. But once motherhood begins, those pauses almost disappear. You don't enter the role of motherhood and then exit. You are in it continuously, awake, asleep, healthy, exhausted. Even in those rare moments of solitude, your mind never leaves the responsibility. This isn't because mothers don't know how to let go, but because motherhood is built as a state of constant readiness. Ready to listen, ready to react, ready to endure. And when a person lives too long in a state of always on, they don't collapse immediately. They wear away. This wear and tear is hard to recognize because it's not noisy. It doesn't appear as violent tears or panic attacks. It appears as a slow disappearance of self. Initially, the mother only ignores her own needs, a little. Eating later is fine, sleeping less is fine, no need to think about her feelings right now. But, a little, repeats every day, every week, every month, and gradually, the lack of room for herself becomes normal. When motherhood becomes a constant state, the woman no longer has a clear boundary between who she is and what she is doing. Identity is reduced to a function: caring, maintaining, keeping things from falling apart. No one asks, "How are you feeling in this role?" Only questions like, "Is the child well behaved? How is the child eating and sleeping? Are you doing well?" And the mother learns to answer, yes, even when she is completely exhausted inside. The danger doesn't lie in the sacrifice itself. It lies in the fact that she is no longer allowed to stop sacrificing. She mustn't be truly tired. She mustn't disappear from her emotions. She mustn't be weak for too long. Then the mind chooses another path to survival: paralysis. Paralysis to avoid feeling pain. Paralysis to continue functioning. Paralysis to avoid facing the question, who am I besides this role? And it is in that paralysis that the thought, "I don't want to exist," begins to appear. Not because the mother hates life, but because she no longer sees a place for herself in her current life. She doesn't want to die. They simply no longer want to remain trapped in a state of no escape, where they can neither rest, nor detach themselves, nor return to being a complete person. The important thing to say, though difficult, is, not every mother has enough space to be a mother while still remaining true to herself. And that's not their fault. When motherhood becomes a constant state, it doesn't mean you've failed. It just means you've endured too long in a system that doesn't allow you to stop. Recognizing this doesn't make you selfish. It's the first step to understanding that you don't need to disappear to rest. You need to be seen, to share, and to stay with yourself, even while still being a mother. Silent thoughts. There are thoughts that are never uttered in complete sentences. Not because they are too dangerous, but because there is no safe place to put them down. They appear very softly, often when no one is watching, when you are alone in the bathroom, when the child has just fallen asleep, when the house is so quiet you can hear your own breathing. These are not violent thoughts. They don't scream, they whisper, "If only I could disappear for a while. Just not be myself for a few days. I wish everything would stop." These sentences often have no continuation, no plan, no specific desire, just a feeling of wanting to withdraw from one's own presence. What makes these thoughts so frightening isn't their content, but the fact that the mother doesn't dare admit that she's thinking them. They quickly self-censor. "I shouldn't think like that. I have a child. I should be grateful. There are people who suffer more than me." And these unspoken thoughts are pushed deeper inside. They don't disappear, they're just repressed. Many mothers don't call them thoughts. They call them tired, exhausted. They call it, probably due to lack of sleep. But ordinary tiredness goes away with rest. These thoughts, however, remain, even when you try to sleep more, try to be stronger, try to be more positive. There are times when the mother doesn't think, "I want to die." They think, "If I didn't exist here, everyone would have an easier time." Maybe I'm just taking up space. If only I weren't the center of all these responsibilities. These are very lonely thoughts. Because if spoken aloud, they are easily misunderstood. Others might panic, overreact, or hastily dismiss your feelings. Don't overthink it. You have everything already. Think positively. Those responses aren't malicious, but they teach the mother a dangerous lesson. Silence is safer. And when silence becomes a habit, unspoken thoughts begin to accumulate. Not into an explosion, but into a persistent feeling that, I no longer belong in my own life. Many mothers describe feeling guilty because of these thoughts. Guilty for not being happy enough. Guilty for not seeing myself as fortunate. Guilt for being exhausted while others suffer even more. But emotions don't operate on the logic of comparison. Pain doesn't disappear just because someone else is hurting more. These unspoken thoughts aren't a sign you're a bad mother. They're a sign you've been holding on for too long without being able to find a place to rest. The important thing, and the hardest thing, is to realize that thinking about wanting to withdraw from the present feeling doesn't mean wanting to end life. It's a silent cry for help. I need to rest from this state. I need to be seen as a person, not just in a role. I need to be able to speak without being corrected. When these thoughts are properly named, they lose their most terrifying part, isolation. You don't need to say it all at once. Sometimes, simply acknowledging in silence that, I'm having these thoughts, and I'm not bad for it. At that very moment, those unspoken thoughts are no longer entirely alone. The loneliness of unawareness. There's a kind of loneliness that's hard to name. Not because there's no one around, but because no one realizes you need to be seen. The mother is present every day in other people's lives. In family meals, in brief conversations, in the familiar role that everyone believes she's okay. And precisely because she's present, no one thinks to ask more deeply. Outwardly, everything seems normal. The children are still cared for. The house is still tidy. Work, if any, is still completed. A smile still appears at the right time. There are no clear signs that inside, the mother is shrinking little by little. This loneliness doesn't come from being abandoned. It comes from being misunderstood as not needing help. When you accomplish everything, others assume you're okay. When you don't complain, others believe you're strong. When you keep going, no one thinks you're dragging yourself along. And the mother learned to stay silent so as not to bother anyone. She didn't want to be an emotional burden to anyone. She didn't want to worry others. She didn't want to shatter the image of a caring mother. So, every time she had a chance to speak, she swallowed it back. It's probably not that bad. What's the point of saying it? I can get through it myself. But overcoming it in silence doesn't make the pain disappear. It only makes the pain go unnoticed. There are times when the mother wishes someone would ask a simple, but relevant question. How are you really doing? Not, are your children well behaved? Not, are you busy these days? It's you. But that question rarely arises. Because society is used to seeing mothers through their function. Taking good care of the children is enough. Sacrificing a lot is right. Tiredness is inevitable. No one teaches us how to recognize a mother who is disconnected from herself, because that disconnection isn't loud. It doesn't cry in public. It doesn't cry for help. It continues to live, but no longer feels alive. The most painful thing about this loneliness is, the mother begins to doubt her own feelings. Am I overreacting? Is everyone like this? Am I weaker than others? When no one notices, you begin to believe that your feelings aren't important enough to be noticed. Answer: you shrink yourself. You don't speak out. You don't expect. You don't hope to be understood. This loneliness is different from being alone. It's the feeling of being surrounded by people but not belonging anywhere. You're there, but no one reaches you. Not because they don't care, but because they don't see. And sometimes, the mother no longer has the energy to make herself more visible. She doesn't know how to express herself properly. She doesn't know where to begin. She doesn't know how to speak without being misunderstood. So she chooses the safest option, to remain silent. What needs to be said here is, this loneliness isn't something you create. It forms when a person has to play too many roles without space to be themselves. When endurance is praised, and needs are seen as weakness. When silence is considered maturity. And if you're in solitude and no one notices, that doesn't mean you're invisible. It just means you've been living in silence for too long. Being seen isn't an unreasonable demand. It's a very human need. And admitting that you're alone is already a way to begin staying with yourself, even if no one else has noticed yet. Why don't they dare to speak up? There's a painful paradox. The more people need to speak up, the more silent they become. Not because they don't want to be heard, but because they've learned, through countless experiences, that speaking out isn't necessarily safe. For many mothers, silence doesn't begin with a decision. It begins with the very familiar reactions of the world around them. When they say they're tired, the response is, being a mother is tiring, of course. When they say they feel empty, the response is, you're probably overthinking things. When they say they're not okay, the response is, it'll be all right, cheer up. No one means any harm, but each of those small reactions teaches the mother one thing: her feelings don't need to be explored. And they learn to suppress them. Another major reason they don't dare speak out is the fear of being misunderstood. Just one wrong word, just one ill-timed remark, and what they're going through can be quickly labeled. You're too negative. Do you have mental health issues? Do you still love your child? The biggest fear isn't being judged, but being doubted about their maternal qualities. In a society where mothers are expected to be a source of unconditional love, any inappropriate emotion becomes dangerous to express. And because they fear hurting others, mothers choose to bear the burden alone. They don't want their husbands to worry more. They don't want family tension. They don't want their children to grow up feeling, Mom isn't okay. Silence, in this case, is a way of protecting others, even if the price is themselves. There's a deeper reason, rarely mentioned. Many mothers lack the language for their emotions. They don't know what to call that state. It's not exactly sadness. It's not exactly despair. It's not exactly depression in the way people usually call it. It's just, not okay. But they don't know how to put it into words. And when there are no words, silence becomes the only option. Add to that the fear of being corrected. Many mothers have tried to speak up and immediately received advice. You should think more positively. You should go out more. You have to be strong for your child. This advice might be right, but when it comes too soon, it makes the mother feel like she's being corrected, not listened to. And after a few times like that, they stop speaking. It's not because they're better, but because they're tired of having to explain their feelings. Some mothers don't even dare to tell themselves. They deny their feelings. They call it weakness. They blame themselves for being ungrateful. Because admitting, I'm not okay, means facing the terrifying question, what if I really am not okay? Silence, in this case, is a way of delaying the truth. But prolonged silence does something very dangerous. It makes the mother believe she has to cope alone. No need for help, no need to share, no need for anyone to know. And it is in that isolation that the state of not wanting to exist has more room to grow. What needs to be said, gently but clearly, is, your inability to speak out doesn't mean you're weak. It means you lived in an environment that wasn't safe enough for you to be human before you were a mother. And if you're still silent today, that's not wrong. But if possible, just a very small, very private moment, to acknowledge that, I'm carrying too much alone. That's all it takes. The silence is no longer completely closed off. The turning point. You don't need to want to be better immediately. The turning point isn't when things suddenly get better. It doesn't come with motivation, slogans, or a strong resolve. For many mothers, the turning point begins with stopping the pressure to be better. When you're already in a state of not wanting to exist, being told to think positively, love yourself, be better, can become a new burden. Not because you don't want to be better, but because you no longer have the energy to want to. And that's not wrong. The first turning point is often very small. You allow yourself to admit that. I don't need to want to be better right now. Just don't blame yourself for it. Many mothers think they have to have hope in order to be allowed to exist. You need a goal to rest. You need to see a brighter future to deserve help. But the truth is, you don't need to see the light to sit in the darkness for a while. The turning point doesn't require you to love life. It only requires something far more humble. Don't disappear from yourself. Maybe you don't want to move forward today. That's okay. Just stay. Stay with your breath. Stay with your tired body. Stay with the feeling of, I'm not okay, without trying to fix it right away. This is where many mothers first feel less alone, not because someone comes along, but because they stop abandoning themselves. The turning point isn't about doing more either. It's often about doing less. Less trying to prove you're okay. Less comparing yourself to other mothers. Don't force yourself to be grateful when you're exhausted. Some days, the turning point is simply, you realize you're tired, and don't deny it. Some days, it's saying a very short, very safe sentence. I haven't been doing so well lately. No explanation, no justification, no asking permission, and if you can't tell anyone yet, the turning point can still exist in silence. It could be writing a line and then tearing it up, or standing still in a room for a few minutes doing nothing, or putting your hand on your chest and realizing, you're still here. The turning point doesn't have to be beautiful. It's not like the resurrection stories that are often told. It can be rough, very slow, very uncertain. But it's real. One important thing to emphasize, you don't need to want to live for others to be allowed to stay. You don't need to think about your children, your family, your responsibilities. At least not in this moment. Because when you exist only out of obligation, you continue to live in a state that exhausts you. The turning point is when you allow yourself to exist not for anyone, but simply because you are a tired human being. And from that very low point, sometimes a very small feeling emerges. Not hope, but a little less tension. No more strain, no more proving anything, just a tiny opening to breathe. You don't need to commit to tomorrow being better. You just need not to commit to disappearing. That's already a turning point. And if today, all you can do is listen to this far, without blaming yourself any further, then you've come further than you think. Conclusion. A gentle message. If you've stayed this far, perhaps you're also carrying a very familiar feeling. Tired, empty, and hard to name. And if that's the case, I want to tell you something slowly, clearly. You're not broken. The fact that you no longer want to exist as you are doesn't say anything bad about you, nor does it deny the love you have for your child. It just shows that you've endured too long in silence, in responsibility, in always having to be okay. You don't need to be stronger after this video. You don't need to promise that tomorrow will be different. You don't need to understand everything you're feeling. Just one thing, don't disappear from yourself. You may be tired, you may feel empty, you may not yet know what you need. All of that is allowed to exist. If you haven't spoken to anyone today, that's not wrong. If today you can only sit still and breathe, that's enough. Perhaps one day, this feeling of numbness will lessen a little. Not because you try harder, but because you're no longer alone with it. And if you're in a moment where everything still feels heavy, please remember, your presence, even when tired, is still valuable. You don't need to disappear to rest. You deserve to stay, in the slowest, gentlest way possible.